page. The Wyoming City Council work session and council meeting will be recorded as part of public record. After each agenda item as read and staff gives a report on the agenda item, I will call upon each council member individually to see if they have questions or comments on the particular item. If you wish to make a motion, which we won't need here tonight, or a second motion, please state your name first. All votes on all items will be completed by a roll call to meet the standards of State Statute 13D-021. The only thing I'd like to know, Linda, member Yeager, can you please just turn off your mic and say that you're present, please?
If I turn off my mic, you won't know I'm present.
Oh, sorry, excuse me, I made a mistake. Could you turn it on, please, and just let us know you're present?
I just did. I am present.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, so Mr. Linwood, are you starting with the preliminary factors influencing the 2021 budget and council priorities?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As everyone knows, this is the same format that we've essentially been using the last 3 years in regards to our budget process. Tonight is our kickoff meeting where we kind of hold a visioning session and go through some of our long-term and short-term strategies for our 2021 budget. Next time we meet, we'll have all our department heads as well, and they'll be able to go a little more in depth into some of those factors in their 2021 budget. I think as we begin to discuss those budget goals and priorities for 2021, included in your packet was some of the ongoing goals and initiatives and some of the new 2020 goals that council adopted at that work session back in February of this year. I'm not going to go real far in depth, but just a quick summation of those ongoing goals, and that was to continue road construction, reconstruction, and maintenance. We know that we're continuing to work on that as our work session we had last week. Business retention and expansion and to attract new business, communication and engagement to look at different events and different softwares and efforts to try to continue that engagement with our community. Policy creation and streamlining to continue to update and create policies as we see fit, and to make sure that they're with today's age and make sure they fit with what we're trying to accomplish as a city. Continued Green Steps initiatives. We continue to look at potential grants or community partners for different steps. And we'll continue to review potential costs in our 2021 budget to go forward on steps. We continue to work on those, and we'll even discuss some of those tonight. Facilities, we continue to do our due diligence for right now for a needs assessment. WOLD is continuing to work on that right now with staff, and we'll have an upcoming work session with the council in regards to that process. Other items, and then that Veterans Memorial Railroad Park, the council adopted a plan with WSB last council meeting to begin that process of defining what that park will be made up of, including potentially that Veterans Memorial and whatever other amenities would be in that park. 2020 goals to review creation of code enforcement ordinance. That was something just discussed with the council regarding trying to clean up some of those nuisance properties and zoning ordinances. We continue to look for different types of housing stock, housing for all, whether it's multifamily, home costs. As the council knows, we are working with a proposal right now from Roars that we'll have more information on in coming council meetings in June. And then we talk about allowing residents to age safely and happily in our community, and that's different housing options, transportation, walkability, and safety, and those are things that we're hopeful to address in some of our street plans as far as that walkability and safety, and we continue to have a more well-versed housing stock, and then potentially not only look at different transportation options that we may have in town here. As part of this strategic planning process tonight, we'll kind of talk about that long-range plan. Hannah Lynch, our finance director, is here from AEM. She'll talk a little more about that long-range plan as we continue to work on that with some of our CIP goals, our 2020 street projects, potentially trying to start planning for any facilities when we evaluate that needs assessment, space needs assessment that's being done by WOLD. I think this is an important component as we try to look at not only 5 into that longer plan, and what the city has the ability to do and evaluate that cash flow and taking into consideration all of our different needs. I'm just going to go through a summation. Council members, if you had any questions about any of our ongoing, before I kind of get into the nitty gritty of that, if you had any questions in regards to any of our 2020 goals, if any of our budget priorities, before we kind of talk about the different components that staff's identified in this preliminary, any questions on those ongoing goals and initiatives?
So if there are, just make sure you state your name. Looks like we're no.
Okay. With that being said, for the 2020 budget cycle, staff level changes potentially for city departments, both the Public Works and Police Department have indicated they'd like to discuss the possibility of some staffing changes in the 2021 budget cycle. The Police Department would be implementing a part-time individual right now, potentially to a full-time position that would be largely in due to the Police Department looking at a body camera policy and purchase of that equipment in 2021 and someone to administer that program, along with our succession planning with the records management system to have an individual that is able to learn that system and be able to maintain it. Right now, as you all know, Public Safety Director Hoppy largely put that together, and he won't be here forever. So I think that's something the council talked about when we were implementing that RMS, to make sure we had someone who understood it, knew how it would work moving forward. The other one is Public Works is evaluating a potential request for a full-time employee, largely due to the city's MS4 permit activities. This is something that on our June 10th meeting, Public Works Superintendent Almgeld will have more information on regards to the hours and the amount of items that we have to continue to work on and make sure that our permit stays compliant. It's an important factor in our Public Works Department with this now, because if that permit is not, all those necessary items in that permit aren't kept up, we do not want to become in violation of that permit. So he'll be able to talk to those in a little greater depth than I am going to tonight, just to more give the council just some information on these potential items that these department heads will be looking at. Changes in programs and levels of services. This is something we can talk about in regards to added or reduced emphasis that the council may consider, things that you want to look at on those 2020 goals and see what if there are priorities. Valuation, we haven't gotten the definitive numbers yet, but right now we're looking that our valuation will be once again between 7% and 8% based on that total county evaluation. I touched on the body cameras for police officers. This is something that we've had some council discussions with in past years, and something that we feel is becoming, you're seeing more and more through different agencies, and you're seeing that this is not mandated, but it's something that's being highly encouraged to put a system in place. Healthcare costs, we'll continue to evaluate those. Right now, the council is all familiar with, we use a cooperative that's with Sourceville. It's many cities and many school districts that we cover most of our city staff's health insurance with. We'll continue to evaluate that, and we'll look at other providers as we did last year to make sure that we're kind of checking all of our bases to make sure that we have our most cost-effective plan in place. Update a streets and capital improvement plan. The council, we had that work session last Wednesday. We continue to work on this and try to now bring, based on the council's direction, to try to bring some prioritization to that and to bring the council some review on potential projects that we look to create, maybe some other than reconstruction, and maybe look at some mill and overlays and other things, and look at that analysis and look at some different financing options on that. The citywide software, that's something that I brought to the council before. We continue to have some issues with our in-house software right now. It's somewhat old, somewhat difficult to work with. Our finance people have multiple times a day that it crashes. We've looked at and had at the end of last year, had some different presentations from companies. We continue to look at those, and I think as far as streamlining some of those services, that we can have that access for all of our departments to look at different things. And then I think one of the biggest components of this would be to look at bringing our utility billing back in-house if we were to get that new software. I think that would allow us to streamline that and have some ownership. We still use a third party, Opus, for that, and we would be able to recover some of those costs that we currently farm out to Opus if we were to look at that citywide software. I have had some discussions with our financial, our finance director, AM, in regards to this, and they are putting together a potential proposal if we were to go to a new software, what those costs would be to be able to transition that and make it sure that we're still having all that old financial information, mainly whether it's our building information or it's point of sale information, and that we're migrating that successfully to a new software. Union contract negotiations, both our contracts for both our local 49ers, Public Works, and LELS are up in 2020. That'll be something that we anticipate these negotiations starting this summer. I think right now, in regards to that, it sounds largely like a lot of these organizations are dealing with the COVID pandemic like we are. We will be reaching out to both those representatives for the 49ers, and right now LELS is appointing a new business agent to let them know that we'd like to start having some of those discussions about those contracts. As we know, last time those usually do take some time to go through and to come to an agreement. So we'd like to start those soon. Ms. Dumas, I'll let you, if you want to touch base in regards to the park capital improvement update.
Yeah, so in the next Park Advisory Commission meeting, we're going to be talking just about some priorities about what that group is interested in seeing in the Wyoming parks. You know, is there an interest in just really maintaining the current infrastructure that we have? Is there an interest in expanding maybe programming or trails or natural spaces that are available to residents to help inform the budget conversation that council is having, to say, how do we want to move forward with park planning, as we currently do not have allocated budget for parks every year, that's a part of kind of where does the city want to go long term with park planning.
Thank you very much. Moving on, in our CIP this year, we have a replacement of our city server. This is an item that usually has about a 5-6 year lifespan. This is just a normal housekeeping item. We'll be analyzing a server that is going to be able to handle all of our data needs and back those up, and then be able to, we have a secondary backup that's cloud-based, and then proper firewalls for security. That becomes more of an issue all the time, and to ensure that we can handle any kind of future software that the city may be evaluating. As I discussed before, the Wold Architects needs space needs assessment. Will continue to move forward with that process, and once completed, that document I think will help the council and staff to begin any kind of potential planning process on improvements, changes, etc. for city facilities. All these items are just to, like I said in the memo, to create discussion tonight and to talk about some of the priorities of these items. We kind of wanted to just open it up to council and talk about things that they're thinking about for the 2021 budget process, things that they're valuing, items that they feel that we really need to look at based on maybe some of our goals or something maybe that we haven't brought up yet. So with that, we'll open it up for council if there's any items on here that you want to talk about in greater depth right now, or potentially look at items that aren't on here that you feel should be discussed with the rest of your council members.
Okay, so I'll go around the room. So let's start with Mr. Schilling. Unmute. There
Come
you go.
on. Well, it wouldn't go. Sorry. Couple of things. One of the things that was very important to me was obviously some type of code enforcement program. Again, we would have to start somewhere and turn that into what we're after to kind of, we don't have anything in place right now. A lot of the things you covered right now, Rob, I'm more than in favor of the majority of them. So I think at this stage, software was another one that was extremely important to me. So we'll just kind of leave it at that for now for me. And if anybody pipes in and triggers something else, I'll ask to speak again.
All right. Thank you, Member Schilling. And we will go to Member Yeager.
I have a number of questions about several of the items. Is this the time to ask him, or should I wait till June 10th?
Some of the more in-depth ones, if the department heads aren't present, Councilmember Yeager, I might ask that you wait until they present it and can talk about it a little more in depth since there are items, but certainly if there are items on here that you want to speak about that aren't directly tied to either Public Works or the police department, I think it's open to discussion.
Well, my questions are more like, for increasing public works staffing, would we still be hiring the 2 seasonal people? For strategic planning, is there going to be another model created? For the body cameras, what will be the ancillary costs? Like I remember the previous discussions, we were talking buku bucks for data storage due to the requirements. How are our 2020 bonds going to be paid? So I don't know how much of any of all this you would answer now, or you would defer to answer.
I think, yeah, and I think those 2 items in regards to how that would work with seasonal staff in regards to some of those costs. I think both Mr. Almgeld and Mr. Hoppe, although they talk specifically on those 2 items. In regards to you said something, I'm sorry, about you were talking about the strategic plan. What were you referring to?
Is there another plan going to be created? What's the cost of it going to be? Don't we already have a model?
I'm sorry, I'm not following. What plan?
I remember that we commissioned a long-term planning model. Is this the same thing?
The one that we commissioned last year, is that what you're referring to?
Possibly.
Okay, I mean, you're talking about the one that we passed last year with AEM? Is that what you're referring to? I can just make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah, I remember passing something with AEM last.
Yep, that would be what we're referring to, and that is part of that long-term plan, and to evaluate all those different costs and be able to, as part of that would be what we're speaking with. And I'll let Ms. Lynch will go into that a little more. She has a brief presentation for the council just to discuss some of that. So certainly she can discuss that as part of that, Councilmember Yeager.
Oh, okay.
All right, we'll go to Member Luger.
I think this is a great list. I think, and I think it reflects what we talked about very accurately in terms of what we discussed in January. I did have a couple of questions or comments, and I wrote it down, and now I have no idea what I wrote. So I did want to talk about, in terms of an ongoing plan, in terms of ongoing ideas for inclusion and ensuring that that we are being inclusive of all members of our community, to talk about racial equity training. And I know this is it's just something that I have been doing some research on, that I've been discussing a little bit with city staff, and kind of bouncing some ideas off folks in City Hall. And I'm just wondering, Rob, do you want me to talk about this a little bit, or do you want to talk about it?
I think either way, Councilmember Luger, if you want to bring it, it's something I think both myself and then Assistant City Administrator Dumas are somewhat familiar with, in regards to a lot of cities that do the different engagement processes and how they're implementing that equity and kind of trying to increase that city pride. So by all means, I think we can talk about it a little bit, or if you want to start kind of what your thoughts were to try to get some feedback. Either way is fine by me.
Well, and I want to clarify too that a lot of this isn't something that has to that I'm that I'm looking at. We have other things right now. I realize that are higher on the list of priorities. But Robert, Kelly, if you wanted to just maybe kind of give an overview. And so it might be something that's kind of like on the back burner for right now.
I think, Kelly, do you want to start? Do you want me to start?
Sure.
Either way?
Yeah, so racial equity is a huge topic that I think is really valuable for cities to consider how we want to address it. It isn't something we want to find ourselves on the wrong side of. And so there's a lot of value in looking at training and programs that are available to cities. And there's a wide variety of investment that communities do in racial equity initiatives. So one of the really prominent programs that exists in Minnesota, it's through the League of Minnesota Cities as a partnership with the Government for Alliance for Racial Equity, GARE program. And what that program does, it sends city staff, and I believe also community members can also be a part of it as appointed by council, to go and do a very in-depth racial equity training program. And then the idea is that they kind of come back and are ambassadors to the community from that program. Other things that communities have done, there's task forces or commissions that have been created that can either, again, involve city staff, council members, community members, to kind of address different topics or look at different, bring ideas, similar to other commissions that we would have, Park Advisory Commission, Racial Equity Commission. And that could also take the form something more broad, maybe that isn't specifically focused on race. It could look, there's human rights commissions that look a little bit more broadly, and that might be something that the council is interested in. And then, you know, it could also be just a single training that staff would go to. There's a really wide range of what communities invest in for this type of program. But if there's an incident that comes up, that it's really valuable to have some language and background and training of how to address those before you really need to address them.
I think that's a great synopsis. Thank you very much, Ms. Dumas. I think that's a great oversight. And I think just the only thing that I'll add is maybe just on just some pieces of that engagement. I think Kelly did a really great job hitting the big pieces, but I think it's not only that, it's as we continue to talk about our engagement, it's all those things. And then there's other things that this can look at, you know, it might be increased volunteerism, or it might be kind of looking at our community about the residents become more engaged, or greater knowledge of our community or city, how it works in that engagement. And it gives us a better idea to be able to respond better and to get to know our community. But I think it just gives us an opportunity to kind of strengthen some of those relationships we have right now, and kind of develop some leaders in the community, and that you know, that we try to get a more engaged community that come to our city events, that come to our council meetings, and want to participate. So I think that gives a bit of a synopsis, and I think Kelly did a really great job breaking down kind of there's a lot of different levels that you can look at this at, really simplistic to being much more in depth. So, and I think, you know, we could provide, staff could provide different levels of that and information if this is something that the council would like some more information on.
Hey, and I know as mayor, I think it's really important that all of us as leaders, council, office staff, even just employees in terms of public works, or it's very important that we're all engaged with this. Mm-hmm. So as leaders, I would like to really believe that on council, we should all be involved in taking these classes as well. I think that's extremely important, that each one of us has that responsibility in our city as leaders to do that. So I think that's great. We can kind of look at that down the road. Member Lugar, is what you're thinking, right? As we kind of start coming out of the COVID-19 and.
Yep, exactly. And, you know, and part of it, I think, is going to be, you know, part of it is contingent too on, you know, the league. I know the league is heavily involved with kind of setting us in the right direction with different trainers. And so, and then just in terms of information seeking from other communities, I think we're all kind of at this same point where we're dealing with the effects of COVID right now. So, you know, a lot of what we do to kind of reach out and see how we want to adopt this and make it appropriate for Wyoming is contingent on third parties being able to you know, give us that information. Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely, and probably down the road a little bit.
There might be some cost involved with that too, is what I'm hearing as well, right? So we kind of need to see, as Ms. Dumas, I'm assuming Ms. Dumas is going to take the lead on that, Mr. Linwood?
I think so. I think she's had probably a little more, has dealt with in some of her communities that she's worked for. And so I would agree with that. That's something that we can look as a staff, but I think she would be our point person on this particular issue and policy as we move forward.
Okay, that's great. So then we just kind of have to start looking at what costs are and all that kind of stuff, right? So as we put it into budget. So perfect. Member Luker, is there anything else?
No, I would like to, just to kind of reinforce the idea of the active shooter training, as well as the ADA compliant facilities. And I know that's coming, we're working on it, but I don't want to lose focus on what we had discussed in the fall of 2019 in terms of safety and upgrading City Hall and upgrading our facilities so that so they're safe for our community, but also our staff who are there all day. Eventually.
Great. That's perfect.
Council, just so you know, I know that we had an active shooter training scheduled, and that was with the COVID pandemic, we had to postpone that, but we will be looking for opportunities in the future to do that training again, and then we continue to work on that needs space assessment for the city. So we'll look though definitely to try to complete that training hopefully in 2020 as hopefully things continue to go in the right direction and settle down and we can have more in-person responses or more in-person gatherings again.
Okay. All right. So as I go through this, I think we talked about at our last work session when it came to our roads, making sure we're taking care of our neighborhoods, our roads, having some walkability within our communities to make sure that's safe. I believe that the COVID-19 and being at home with our families have given us probably a different view of what family life can be and will be going into the future, and that's spending more time together. So I think that's probably even a little more important right now. They've really kind of gotten into that habit of being outside and playing outside and just enjoying each other's company. So super important to me, I think, on that. Housing cost is another one. As we talk about housing for all, I know EDA is really looking into that and how we can provide housing for our workforce, I think is super important. And a lot of our workforce right now, honestly, it is younger people, 19 through 25, 30-ish. So we need to kind of keep a focus on that. The Memorial Park, so Railroad Park or the Veterans Memorial, we talked about that as well. I think that that's just something added to our community. I'm always surprised when I tell people we have 17 parks and they're like, what? You have 17 parks? Where are they all? So I'd like to maybe see a little more of a push to let people know exactly how many parks we do have. And then, Railroad Park is that entrance to our city. And I think it's really important that we have a good park there. I'm with the rest of the council regarding facilities. Again, the situation that we're in really shows probably some of that great need to be able to keep everybody safe. And I'm not just talking staff and employees, I'm talking our residents as well. So really making sure that we're kind of looking at that important. And one thing we don't have on here, and so I'm just going to kind of throw this out again, relating to the situation that we have. It's been kind of nice to not have binders of paper, 150 sheets of paper every 2 weeks. And I would actually like to see us somehow go paperless. I think we're getting really good at downloading things, and as I'm sitting here and I'm reading things off the screen. So I guess I would like us to really kind of talk about whether it's a computer screen, what does that look like? And maybe we as a council, some of us aren't as techie. Do we need a class to kind of help us with how do we organize this? How do we write on those notes and save them versus the reams of paper that we get? I also think it'll save staff time a lot as well as they put those together. So somewhere in here, if technology, I guess, is where we would put that. And I don't know about everybody else, but I am definitely enjoying not having reams of paper. So that's what I have. Rob, Member Schilling, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to, I tried that little raise hand in the participant. So I'm just gonna speak up. To add to Councilwoman Luger's point on the ADA, the use study will actually show us all of our deficiencies in that when that does get completed. So that'll let us know what all of our building standards need to be to, and what our deficiencies are with each area that we occupy. So I just wanted to add that one thing. I've been through this already, so that use study is going to be very helpful for us as a council and as well as for the staff. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Linwood, I'm kind of curious as to, do you think going forward, we do have somebody who comes in and cleans the offices and staff does it right now, we have protocol. Do you see in our budget that we may have to do, and I'm going to say cleaning more often? Do you think that that's something that we have to budget a little bit more for going forward? Because I hate to use the phrase, this is what normal is going to be, but I just want to make sure that we're kind of thinking about that, and does that need to be put into budget?
I think we'll, at a staff level, we'll definitely be looking at all of our departments. Currently, in regards to a lot of the standards that we have in place and will continue to have in place, I think probably throughout this year, and we'll try to evaluate as we get closer for 2021. But right, we have upped, we have our normal contracted cleaning services that come in, but just our daily clean that our staff is now completing in regards to every morning and then every day at the end of the day. And that's not only just our personal workspaces, that's in regards to high touch areas that we have been, we're sanitizing and wiping down. And as we look to opening our facilities back up and actually having contact with the public, a lot of those different supplies, I know this year we're, when we can get a hold of them, we're still trying to procure those cleaning supplies and PPE right now. That budget item is definitely up for 2020. Anticipate that we're probably going to be at that, as you discussed, that level of new. So we'll probably plan that based on what we're hearing right now, that this is still going to be an issue in 2021, maybe not nearly as much, but some of those sanitation guidelines aren't going to be going away anytime soon. So we'll definitely take that into consideration as we look at our operating funds for all of our different departments, because it's not only in City Hall, it's desks and things like that, Public Works, it's vehicles, it's facilities, fire department, police department, it's the same thing. It's, some of the larger vehicles, squad cars, and then those working stations as well. So there's definitely more due diligence and more product that we use for now trying to maintain some of those sanitary guidelines with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, and then I just have one other question about bringing utility billing back in. As we look at the servers and we look at, we've had the discussion, we've been looking at this a good year and a half, I want to say, that we've been studying or talking about it and bringing back in. We're still pretty much thinking that even buying that software program, it's still going to save us money in the long run with that utilities being in-house, based on all the time and energy that staff has to put into correcting mistakes, that come around, and residents that are calling.
Right. I mean, the call center is still through Opus, but a lot of the more complex issues with utility billing, they're handled by our in-person staff individual, Allie. She handles a lot of those more complex ones. There are errors that do happen with with that service that we continue to try to ask to be changed. But I think there would definitely, I think we feel as a staff that there would be a lot more ownership, bringing it back in-house and hopefully maintaining a little better of service to our residents and accuracy on some of our bills, and try to avoid some of those mistakes. Obviously there'd be a cost savings without using a third party, bringing that back in-house as well.
And I think too, my understanding is as we have Ally learning the system, as we bring that back in, we actually have very capable staff of being able to take care of it, because it is very complicated, and she's been working with it 2 years, or a year? I'm kind of losing track of time, so.
Approximately, and she's very familiar with the software that we use, and we've had conversations with Public Works too, as we look to do some of the different meter readings that we're looking at right now in regards to the software we use to read meters is going to be going away. So there's a lot of different things that we're taking into consideration, and that software would be something where it would give accessibility throughout our staff as we look at building permits, as far as how we do that, or whether we have water and sewer connections and how those can flow through our different departments and staff. And really, I think comes into to some of the service levels that we provide our community moving forward. And that's, our online services, as we now have expanded those largely, as we had some in place before, but largely due to the COVID-19 pandemic with our building department. But I think there's some expectation from our residents and from contractors in regards to what we do with some of those services that we provide right now. And I think implementing a new software is going to definitely increase that, maybe to an expectation that a lot of our residents and contractors have because of experiences and other ways that they do business or other communities.
So basically it puts us back in the 21st century is kind of what we're thinking, right?
I think it puts us right level with a lot of different communities, how they're doing business right now. And I know, I believe Councilmember Schilling, you have a lot of electronic services through your building software in West St. Paul, and there's a lot of streamlining and a lot of resources that you have more time and more efficiencies that are created through that as well. And it would be a whole one-stop shopping software. So I think that's one thing that we're looking at as a staff, that it's all connected, it's all accessible to everyone, and how accessible to who should have access to different pieces. I'll be clear on that, but it'd be something I think would really improve efficiencies.
Perfect. All right. I think that's all I have. Hannah, there's Hannah. So, all right. Mr. Lewin, did you want to turn it over to Hannah now, or is there some other things you want to?
Unless council has anything else, we can certainly talk after, but Hannah, if you wanted to, Ms. Lynch had a brief presentation for the council to discuss some other items in this 2021 budget and how we're going about that.
Yes, let me just share my screen. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Can everyone see my PowerPoint? Okay, it's just very short, and it was brought up earlier. So good question. We approved this long-term plan. It's really a long-term financial plan. Let me just make sure that I can still, there we go. It was approved in July 2019. It's taken a while to gather the CIP. So we take CIP by fund. So we're analyzing all of the city's funds. And Rob has been working with city staff to be able to compile that CIP for 2020 to 2025. With that, I have now received that. I'm going to start drafting the long-term plan. And we really want to make sure that we're aligning it with your goals. So really, I just want to kind of walk through some of the high level overview of what that long-term plan is going to look like, as well as how when you can expect to see drafts and final products, and how it will kind of change our budget process a little bit this year. So this is just a sample. This shows the CIP. So this is what Rob was working with city departments to put together. By fund, what does the city want to purchase in the next 5 years? So he's been working very hard to put that together for what's the equipment that we need. And equipment is purchased out of many different funds, as well as, your street plan. We will be implementing all of these other studies that you're doing as well. So we'll make sure we work with WSB, as well as looking at your building assessment. All of those will go into here. So we really have got this underway. So Rob has sent AEM a lot of the CIP. The second part of that, though, for each fund is then taking a look at, okay, we know requests are, what we want to buy over the next 5 years. But really, how can that be purchased? Do we have excess reserves currently that could pay for it? Are we going to have to levy? Are there grants? Sometimes there's other communities that can pitch in as well. So that's what I'm going to start drafting. And we're putting that together by fund to take a look at, kind of bring it full circle with that CIP. That's really helpful, because then what we can start to do is we can do a longer range plan on your property tax levy. So currently we only know what your property tax levy is the next year when we're doing our budget cycle. But with this long-term plan, we'll be able to try and project out your property tax levy till 2025. And it's really just a good guide for city staff as well as consultants. In this long-term plan, we'll look at the general fund and we'll project that out for 5 years. The debt service levies. So I think it was mentioned, how are we going to pay for these 2020 bonds? We'll make sure to look at the bond documents for all of your outstanding debt and schedule out the exact levy you will need for all of those in the next 5 years, and then combine that with the capital levies that will be needed to purchase CIP items. This is a good graphic. It just reminds us that the property tax levy is used for those purposes, but anything water or sewer related, that would be user fees. And we are always looking at that rate study and seeing how we're comparing if our user fees are sufficient for those operations. This looks like a lot. The first part is really what I just talked about though. So the first 3 sections. So first it's projecting out that general fund levy. So what's the levy that's going to be needed through 2025 for general operations. Next, for debt service. So we'll look at all of the outstanding bond issues and what debt service levy will be needed to make those principal and interest payments. And finally, then we'll put in there, according to the plan, if a revenue source of a tax levy is needed to purchase CIP items, what does that look like? If we bring all of those together, what is our total tax levy till 2025? The middle part of the screen, again, it's a lot of data, but we project out the tax capacity. So we'll use a growth assumption. So like Rob said, currently, I think last year, the valuation, the tax capacity in Wyoming increased about 9%. We're looking at maybe 7 or 8. We try and stay conservative in these plans, right? So we might look at, a 3% growth assumption in tax capacity. And with that, so finally, it's kind of at the bottom there, it's total direct tax rate. We'll show you, if you were to follow this plan, what your tax rate would be for the next 5 years. And that's very helpful. Instead of just doing, year to year, can we purchase this capital? Nope, I don't know when we can push it off. This will be a really great guide.
Anna, can I just, for residents that might be watching, these aren't our numbers. These are just samples, correct? Because there's some things in there that somebody might be going, really? Wyoming's going to be getting a bush hog wash or something. There's some things I saw in there. So I really want to make sure that if residents are watching or view this later on, this is not our budget, our line items, correct?
Correct. These are all sample reports. I did pull them straight out of the proposal, but again, I don't expect you to have memorized them from last July. But I just really want to give an idea of what you're going to be able to see in the coming months with this planning. But good point. My next slide here, this is straight out of your budget memo from December 2019, and I just wanted to have it as a good reminder. Again, switching from sample data to actual City of Wyoming data, what some of your numbers looked like last year. So if we look at the very bottom, the city tax rate did decrease about 2%. It was about 43.5. And then just above that, tax capacity did increase 9%. So with that, in the long-term plan, I know it's very hard. You've never seen the long-term plan before. I'm just showing you some sample documents. But sometimes it's good to get some guidance so that we know what to originally draft and put together in this plan. Some of the best guidance is what you would kind of like to see with your tax rate. That's kind of what everything rolls up into in that plan. So if anyone, has any discussion or, wants to point out any goals or priorities that you want us to follow. Maybe in the next 5 years, you don't want to see that tax rate go above 43.5. Maybe you don't want to see it go above 45. Those are just examples. But we just wanted to give some time. There's going to be lots of time for you to see actual drafts and give input. But before we get started, to make sure that we're aligning with your goals and priorities.
All right. Hannah, are you still online?
And no worries. So like I said, you're going to have lots of options to be able to digest this data, see what the plan looks like for the city of Wyoming. Again, this is another report. It's a sample, but it's something you will see in your long-term plan. It's one of the main reports. So one thing we roll up is we look at the total levy for every fund. Another thing we look at for every fund is the cash balance. So we're going to be projecting out every fund for the next 5 years in this long-term plan. The one reason I wanted to talk about this is that normally the city of Wyoming, when you get your budget memo and your budget worksheets at work sessions, you normally see budgets for every single fund, every single line item. Since we're going to be working through drafting this long-term plan in tandem with the 2021 budget, we were wondering if you guys would be okay if we formally adopted budgets for the general fund and the enterprise funds, and then all other funds. We just don't want to project in the long-term plan and then also budget. So if we could just follow the long-term plan for those other funds, or if there was any comments or discussion on kind of moving towards that route.
Do we want questions on that right now, Hannah?
We can always do it at the end. That's fine too.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, I just have one more. This is a little bit off from just the long-term plan, but it kind of fits in. So we have a couple things we want to talk about with the 800 CIP funds. So currently, your main ones are listed here. You have different ones for each department to call out, the capital needs for fire, police, administration, and streets. Each of those funds have the same revenue source. So they're all supported by a tax levy, as well as you guys use your LGA or local government aid to help purchase capital items. We were wondering, and again, we can discuss this at the end, if we would be able to combine into one capital equipment fund, just for ease of forecasting and planning, since they all have the same revenue sources. If I flip back, I don't want to flip back too far, it gets kind of stuck. But in the long plan, when we look at the CIP, we identify what department each of those items belong to. So it's still very transparent what department is requesting which CIP items. So we're just wondering if we would be able to, move all of those funds into one capital equipment fund. With that, so following along with those CIP funds, I believe this is my last slide. Bear with me. So on the right-hand side here, this is last year's budget to actual statement that were in your audited financial statements. This is the general fund budget to actual. One thing, and it's not super apparent for financial reporting purposes, but your CIP funds that we just talked about, those 800 funds, are actually grouped with the general fund in this statement. So when you're looking at this statement, in a big way you can see it is if you look on the left-hand number column, the net change in fund balance is negative $10,799. And you guys always approve a balanced general fund budget. The reason it's not showing as balanced is because these CIP funds have always been grouped with the general fund for financial reporting purposes. It's been this way for many, many years before my time. It's my understanding that it historically needed to be presented this way in accordance with, auditing and accounting standards because of the way the city budgeted and assigned tax levy. They used to not assign a tax levy to each fund, but assign expenditures. So the only way to kind of balance that out was to group these. Depending on what you guys feel, if you want us to keep all of the 800 funds, or if you want us to, move all that activity into one capital equipment fund, we're asking that you would then approve a resolution at your next council meeting, not tonight, the first one in June, to then remove this activity from the general fund so that it's not all grouped together and it's more apparent for financial statement presentation. All right, so I think we covered a lot of information, but just to recap some of the items that we would love some, input or discussion on. The first one is if there's any real goals, specifically maybe related to the tax rate you would like to see projected over the next 5 years. With those CIP funds, if you'd like to keep them all as separate departmental 800 funds, or if we can group them together in a, capital equipment, capital project fund. And then really the last one, ungrouping, just kind of comes with whatever decision you make on the presentation of these CIP funds. So I'm happy to answer any questions or if we just have any discussion.
Okay, let's go into discussion. I think we'll go around the room again. I'm gonna actually start with Member Yeager.
There we go. Before I make, give a comment about whether to get rid of all those 800 funds, I would like to see how the grouping would be first, because at the end of the day, I got to be able to explain to somebody else or a resident what we're spending where. And I have no problems if I can look at it, see it, and be able to figure it out.
All right.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would like to see it all on paper. The marker and the book reinforces a lot of what text.
Okay. All right. Member Schilling.
I actually have nothing at this time, Mayor.
Member Luker.
I have nothing at this time either.
Okay. I'll throw my opinion in there, not that it's any big deal. I just always want to make sure we're transparent. That's always the goal, and we've worked towards that the last 4 years and have done a really good job at that. So it's extremely important, I think, for us to know that if something is in this overall budget, can we find a line item that says, this is what it's for. So transparency is just that number one goal, I think. So maybe as we talk through this or any more questions, you can kind of settle that it's definitely as transparent, if not more transparent.
Yes, agreed. So just bringing up the sample report again. So this is a sample cities capital equipment fund. You can see on the left-hand side, all of their departments are purchasing equipment within this fund, right? So we have ladder trucks for the fire department, dump trucks for streets, park equipment in parks. So whenever anything is purchased, even though it may be in this one fund going forward, you can always reference back to the plan and see what department is purchasing that item.
Okay, and will the department still, obviously, they're still going to have to do a report, right? And they turn that in, and so we're still going to be very aware of what it is they want to put in their CIP, correct?
Yes, agreed. So, city staff as well as Mr. Linwood has been working to put this together, and they will continue to be consulted throughout this process as we do drafts and final reports to make sure that their departments are accurately represented.
Okay, and my other thing that I want to ask is just to make sure that, let's say if we look at the Bobcat replacement that you're showing on here for $24,000, let's say that doesn't happen, or we need to have the dump truck, there's kind of not that, well, it's all in this one fund, so it doesn't matter where it goes. So making sure that we know that that's what it's budgeted for, that's what it stays with, correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, another thing we can work on too is a lot of cities will update this plan annually. So it will be an annual process. So, that happens very often with capital equipment. Something else may come up. And then when that update comes, we'll just make sure to, move it in the plan and assess the fund's capability to then pay. A nice thing too, let me see if I can flip the next slide here. When it's all in one fund, we'll really make sure we're looking at this end balance number so that we're adequately using our reserves as well. Currently, when we're budgeting, we're making sure, that we're levying for exactly what we're going to be purchasing a lot of times. So just making sure that, if we have reserves in that fund, we don't necessarily have to have a capital levy that year, and always assessing that reserve balance.
Are there any further questions with that after Hannah answered those questions I had? Shake your head. No, okay, so.
No, ma'am.
All right, Mr. Linwood, do you have anything you'd like to say about that?
No, I think this is something, once again, I had some discussions with Ms. Lynch on this, and I think it's consistent with you're seeing, I guess, what a lot of cities are going towards, and it's just a little way to make things more simplistic is how we do our capital, to have it grouped in one. By all means, we'll still be able to reference that long-term plan. And I think as Mayor and Councilmember Yeager talked about, they want to still be able to explain where those dollars are going in those funds. And I think that transparency component is still going to be able to be there. But I think we're going to be a little more updated in regards to some of the accounting standards that you're seeing and what's practiced among many municipalities. And I think utilizing AEM, obviously they represent many cities across the metro, and usually are on the kind of the forefront of how people are going about through their budgeting process. So I think this made sense.
Okay, perfect. All right, if there are no other questions or comments with that, we can move on. Hannah, you did a great job. Thank you. It's good to see you again, even though it's so far away.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Linwood, is there other things that we want to talk about?
Council, unless you have other items in regards to asking questions about some of these talking points, or we kind of went through some of those priorities and some of those things. I think we went through that. That was really just to kind of get an idea tonight on what the council's thinking about for 2021. Obviously, we have a lot more budget work sessions to go, and at that next one, we'll have our department heads present to be able to answer a lot of those questions about potential budget, and we'll have our CIP budget available for 2021 to really go through those. But these are just some of the highlights that I wanted to hit on and make sure the council is aware of, and just those preliminary factors. So we still have a little bit of time if anyone wanted to discuss any items or talk about priorities or service levels or any of that, we certainly can. Otherwise, I don't have much else in regards to this document as we talked about tonight.
Okay, and so we don't have to make any motions. We don't have to approve anything at this time. Hannah's got some direction from what we talked about, so that's good. I know we do have a 7 o'clock, our regular scheduled council meeting. So we do have a few more minutes. Otherwise, if not, we have a few extra minutes to kind of prepare for that. All right, I'll go around the room. Member Schilling, anything?
Not at this time, Mayor.
Okay. Member Yeager?
I do have concerns about the increase in the budget when it comes to looking that we're about to run into a recession or possibly a depression with high unemployment.
I don't think we've presented any budget yet tonight, so I think I'm not quite sure. I'm not understanding.
Well, body cameras, staff increases will all, should be increasing the budget. My concern is that unemployment being projected at 25%, a recession or possibly depression coming, can we afford all this?
Okay.
I think that'll be something that nobody knows what's going to happen come end of the year or 2021, and lots of questions, and we have no money. We don't have any value sent on anything, and that's a part of us getting together for budget, right? Is to be able to discuss this and look at stuff, and as we go forward through the next 6 months, we're going to know a little bit more about that forecast. So I think all of us on council and staff, and we're all very aware of what's happening with our economy, and know that we always have our residents' needs and concerns at the top of the list. So with that, Member Luker, do you have anything else you'd like to end with?
Nope, I got nothing.
Okay, I think that's everybody. So with that, appreciate everybody's time with the work session. We look forward to more meetings on the budget. I think this just really shows that transparency again that we've been working on for the last 4 years. So appreciate the time and energy that's put into it. And then we look forward to seeing everybody at 7 o'clock and going over our next meeting. So with that, I will call an adjournment to this meeting. And Mr. Linwood will be right back on live YouTube at 7 o'clock, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we'll see everyone then.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Hannah. Good to see you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.